Chapter 41 A Scene. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The other side, North Sea, Kiev Island. Kiev Island is a neutral island located in the North Sea. The island is not big, with only one town with a population of several thousand, and it does not belong to any country's sphere of influence. It is precisely because of the lack of management that various illegal forces have gradually gathered on Kiev Island. Thieves are rampant, the mafia is rampant. Pirate ships dock unscrupulously at the dilapidated port, and gunshots are heard from time to time. On the streets, Darren and Flying Squirrel were standing on the harbor smoking cigarettes. The black hooded coats they wore almost completely covered their figures, making it impossible to identify their identities. Bustling crowds were rushing on the port piers, and the sounds of quarrels, hawking, and goods being dragged on the ground filled the surroundings. The port quay smells terrible. There are smelly fish, rotten fruits, expired spices, feces and even body parts floating on the coast. The smell that penetrates the nostrils is simply hell. Has everything been arranged? Darren squinted his eyes and stared at the merchant ship that was gradually sailing out of the port, and asked while puffing away his smoke. Yes, I didn't show up. It was handed over to the caravan through a mafia force controlled by us. It is impossible for anyone to find out about us. She will go to a new place and start a new life. The Flying Squirrel whispered with solemn eyes. Under the seemingly calm face, his heart was beating extremely fast. Don't be so nervous. Darren noticed something strange about the Flying Squirrel, turned around and patted him on the shoulder with a smile. Besides her, there was no one alive on that ship. Even if the higher authorities really launch an investigation, they won't be able to find any clues. To this world, the little girl selling flowers has sunk into the sea along with the official ship. The Flying Squirrel took a long drag on the cigarette and couldn't help but roll his eyes. You put it lightly, thinking of the incredible feat this guy had done. Flying Squirrel was still so nervous that his palms were sweating even now. That's a celestial dragon. The god who possesses supreme power and status. But then again, after learning that Darren's god-killing operation was successful, he also felt indescribably happy. In his mind, he couldn't help but think of the innocent and clear smile on the little girl's face when they parted just now. Maybe the risk is worth it for that smile. Darren, you are right, that Tianlong man really deserves to die. Where's her father? What should we do? The Flying Squirrel exhaled a long puff of smoke and asked in a deep voice. Darren pondered for a moment. It is estimated that it won't be long before the higher-ups will send people to Badia Island to investigate, so the truth cannot be told to her father yet. We need his cooperation in a play. The Flying Squirrel's pupils shrank slightly. Investigation? Didn't you say they couldn't find any clues? Darren sneered. They couldn't find it. I used the ability of the magnetic fruit to directly block the signal of the monitoring phone bug. Even if the government investigates the surveillance video afterwards, it will only find that the line was suddenly disconnected. In this case, the conclusion they derived from this would be that the entire official ship would be destroyed in an instant. As a result, the focus of their investigation will naturally shift towards those powerful people with terrifying strength. He is just a merely colonel in the headquarters, and there is no way he will be suspected under any circumstances. But no matter what, the investigation team has to put on a show before they can give an explanation to the government. The Flying Squirrel suddenly realized, and then frowned. Do you think the government will continue to investigate? Darren shook his head. It's impossible, they don't have such patience. The most important thing is that this time the dragon incident is still kept secret. No one knows about it except the members of the investigation team and the senior officials of the headquarters. Since no one knows, there is naturally not much political pressure on the government. This time the Tianlong incident is different from the Xianghua Islands incident in the original plot. In the original plot, Straw Hat Luffy fought against the celestial dragons in full public view. Everyone on the island knew that the celestial dragons were offended and attacked, and the world government was forced to take severe measures due to political pressure. The admiral was dispatched, and Kizaru's crusade against the Straw Hat pirates ended in failure, and he could only capture 500 unlucky pirates. But this time it's different. No one knew that a celestial dragon had died. The clues and evidence were also completely blocked by himself. The final outcome of the Investigation will be a hasty conclusion. Listening to Darren's analysis, Flying Squirrel couldn't help but sigh. I really don't know how your head grows. You are obviously from Beihai, but you have such a clear understanding and analysis of high-level officials. It's just that if the investigation is completed by then, Cake and Guillaume will probably guess something. Aren't you afraid that they will expose the secret? That he turned to look at Darren, his tone vaguely concerned. No matter how you say it, for the Hawkeye Navy, the Guillaume and the two are outsiders after all, not to mention they didn't have a good impression of Darren from the start. Darren smiled. Even if they guess something, they don't dare to say it, let alone know how to say it. He looked at the dirty and black harbor in front of him with a comfortable expression, as if he should be here. They are good people, better than me, better than you, better than most people in this world. They are too clean and too clear, which is their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. I did something they wanted to do but didn't dare to do, so of course they wouldn't say anything. And once they make their choice. The Navy captain's eyes suddenly became meaningful. They're tied to our boat. The Flying Squirrel was shocked, took a deep breath, and then couldn't help but smile bitterly. You actually took advantage of them all. You are really a devil. Darren smiled nonchalantly and said. Flying Squirrel, did you know? Life, and I mean real life, is never a battle between good and evil, but a trade-off between greater evil and lesser evil. This world has long been turned upside down, and there is no place for pure justice to survive. The vast majority of navies can either swallow their anger and become the government's watchdog, or they can only watch the crimes being committed, be unable to change, and finally be incompetent and furious. But unfortunately, I don't want to be a dog, nor do I want to be a bystander. He turned to look seriously at his adjutants, comrades and partners who had been following him for many years, his eyes extremely unruly. All this will change one day. But before that, I have to be a devil. He exhaled a stream of smoke like a dragon and said meaningfully. Because we are already living in hell. The Flying Squirrel listened to these words blankly and remained silent. After saying that, he showed a relaxed look again, put out the cigarette and stretched greatly. Let's go back and meet our warring states general. He said with a smile. Badia Island, a huge, scarred warship slowly docked. The bow of the warship is in the shape of a giant Buddha, and there are Navy soldiers with solemn expressions stationed on the deck. They look like the most elite troops in the Navy. The civilians and caravans on the port stared dumbfounded at this behemoth, which was loaded with super-large artillery and exuded a serious atmosphere of war. They subconsciously retreated and dispersed, and they were shocked in their hearts. This is like a war fortress floating on the sea. Warring States led a group of Marines off the deck, and the CP-0 member wearing a mask was hidden in the crowd. This island. Warring States looked at the architectural style of blue roofs and white walls on Badia Island and couldn't help but frown. A soldier walked up to him and whispered a few words in his ear. I see. Warring States sighed in his heart. Although he was a little disgusted with the behavior of the Badia Island municipal government, he could only shake his head helplessly. Tap tap tap. At this moment, a burst of rapid footsteps came from the end of the street. Sengoku looked up, and a soft smile soon broke out on his face. I saw Guillaume and Kaki, leading hundreds of Marines, rushing over. Warring States General. The two came to Warring States and raised their hands in solemn salute. As soon as he finished speaking, the surrounding people were shocked. This unattractive-looking man wearing black-rimmed glasses and a weird seagull hat turned out to be the Admiral of the Navy headquarters, the highest combat power of the world government. Well, that's good. You guys came to Beihai and you've grown a lot. Sengoku looked at the two people in Guillaume in front of him, his eyes gradually filled with admiration. In his perception of hockey, the auras of Guillaume and Cake were much stronger than when they left Marineford. It can be seen that brat Darren is quite attentive to you. Speaking of this name, dissatisfaction and anger flashed across both Cake and Guillaume's faces. But then again, why are you two alone? Where's Darren and the Flying Squirrel? Warring States looked around and asked. As soon as he finished speaking, a voice with a chuckle came from the other side of the street. It is truly an honor for Beihai to have the general from the Warring States period come to Beihai. Everyone looked at the sound. I saw Darren and Flying Squirrel in military uniforms walking over quickly. However, the moment Darren appeared, Sengoku clearly discovered from his own sense of domineering. The people on Badia Island all looked at Darren with anger, resentment, and fear. He looked like he dared not speak out in anger. This is, Sengoku frowned slightly. More updates, please give me everything. Chapter 42 Consensus. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Badia Island, City Hall, Conference Room. The rest of the people had left the conference room sensibly, leaving only Darren, Flying Squirrel, Gion, Sengoku and Porcellino sitting down. This is an internal meeting of the North Sea Navy. Darren lit a cigar, glanced at Porcellino who was wearing toad sunglasses, turned to Sengoku, and said with a smile. I wonder what happened to General Sengoku's campaign against Bundy Waldo. Looking at the Admiral with a depressed expression in front of him, Darren felt a little amused. 2 of the 3 generals in the Navy headquarters are vacant. Zifa devotes himself to teaching, and Garp refuses to be promoted, so basically all the trivial matters and troubles fall on the head of Sengoku alone. What a great injustice. Warring States shook his head and said. Something happened on the way and the mission was interrupted. He picked up the tea cup and took a sip. His deep gaze swept over the faces of everyone present, and their expressions gradually became serious and cold. The reason why I came here this time is because of this matter. Sensing the seriousness in Sengoku's tone, Gion and the others sat up straight with serious expressions. After a second's pause, Warring States slowly said. 1 day ago, something happened in the North Sea that shocked the world government. Sild Saint, a celestial dragon who returned to the holy land of Mariajoya from Badia Island not long ago, was attacked on the way back, and died on the spot. The moment the words fell, Darren's expression changed drastically and he stood up suddenly. What? How is this possible? The Flying Squirrel also had a suitably shocked look on his face, a look of disbelief. Gion and Kaki were shocked. They didn't know what they were thinking of, and their eyes subconsciously glanced in Darren's direction, but when they saw the shocked expression on Darren's face, they were all stunned. Warring States, who was so worried about this incident, didn't notice the obscure micro-expressions between the 2 people, and just pinched his temples with a headache. Only Porcellino seemed to notice something, and the smile on his lips suddenly became full of meaning. The attack on the Tianlong people is still confidential, but I have received orders from the government to conduct a thorough investigation into the matter. Warring States sighed. But according to the surveillance video of the bug on the official ship, we haven't been able to find any clues yet. But what can be inferred is that the attacker's strength is extremely amazing. The world government's escorts did not have time to react, and the official ship was directly sunk. This is relevant information. As he said this, Warring States took out a document and handed it to Darren. Darren took it, glanced at it quickly, and couldn't help but murmured. Destroying the official ship in an instant, with such combat power, even in the Great Channel, there are not many people who can do it, let alone in a small place like the North Sea. He handed the documents to Flying Squirrel and others in turn. The Flying Squirrel also read it quickly. Although he had already expected it, he was shocked. The intelligence content described in this document, as well as the direction of the Warring States General's investigation, are exactly the same as what Darren analyzed. Sengoku General, have you identified the suspect? At this time Darren spoke in a deep voice. Since this happened in Beihai, Beihai must also bear part of the responsibility. Beihai and the Beihai Navy are willing to cooperate with your work unconditionally. Warring States was very satisfied with Darren's attitude, nodded and said. Well, it was indeed a wise decision to hand over the North Sea Navy to you. It's just that I have already investigated suspects with this ability, but I haven't found anything yet. This time I came to Badia Island to further investigate. After all, considering the cause and effect, Hilda Saint himself set off from Badia Island and returned to the holy land of Mariajoya. That's it. Darren suddenly understood and nodded with deep understanding. You are responsible for the protection of Saint Shields on Badia Island. Warring States gently tapped the conference table with his fingers. Before Shield Saint set sail, did you notice that he encountered any strange people or strange things on the island? After the words fell, Sengoku saw the expressions of Gion and Cake change, as if they were hesitant to speak. "I'll tell you the truth, General of the Warring States period." Darren spoke slowly at this time, his expression extremely complex. "Before Lord Shield Saint set sail, something did happen." "Oh." Warring States raised his eyebrows. "What's the matter?" Gion and Kaki suddenly turned their heads and looked at Darren in astonishment. I saw the Navy captain sigh. "That's a very unfortunate thing." He carefully considered his tone and slowly told the story about the flower-selling father and daughter on Badia Island. Boom. The huge fist smashed down, and the conference table in front of Warring States shattered and fell into pieces. "Damn!" He stood up suddenly, clenched his fists tightly, and trembled visibly. I don't know who the "damn" was meant to be. The image of a thin little girl being roughly dragged into the cabin, shivering and huddled in a dark corner flashed through his mind. Gion and others looked at the angry expression of the Warring States general and did not dare to speak. After a while, Zengguo forced himself to suppress the anger in his heart. "That's it for this meeting. I'm a little tired." After being silent for a while, he dropped the words in a hoarse voice and turned to leave without saying a word. Gion and others also hurriedly followed. Darren and Porcelino were the only two people left in the huge conference room. Both of them had a hint of a smile on their faces. "Sussy ignores Dana, Major General Porcelino." Darren suddenly laughed, broke the silence, took out a gilded cigar, and threw it to Porcelino. Porcelino took it, put it under his nose, sniffed it, and said with a smile, "I haven't seen you in a few years, but you still like to enjoy life as always, Darren." Darren lit a cigar for himself and shrugged. "Being in the Navy is hard enough. There are many things that you don't need to do to yourself, right?" Porcelino looked at him deeply and suddenly grinned. "I can see that you are doing well in Beihai." He paused, his tone full of meaning. "Darren, this is just the beginning, right?" Darren smiled calmly. "Who knows? I don't like trouble either." "Well, I learned this advantage from you." Porcelino scratched his head with a distressed expression. "Indeed, trouble is always bad. But trouble will always come," Darren said. "Anyway, just don't get involved with me." Porcelino stretched greatly, stood up from his seat, and walked towards the door. "Thank you for the cigar." He turned his back to Darren and waved. Just when he stepped out of the conference room door, his footsteps suddenly stopped. He turned back and smiled at Darren. "By the way, I always feel that the truth behind the attack on the Tianlong people is not that complicated." "Oh. What's Major General Porcelino's opinion?" Darren flicked the ashes from his cigarette. Porcelino's sunglasses shone with an eerie light. "I think it's very possible that it was just attacked by a Neptune-like creature. After all, such a huge ship is very conspicuous. It was an accident, what do you think, Darren?" Silence, deathly silence. Porcelino stared at the naval captain sitting there smoking, as if he wanted to read something on the latter's face. However, Darren just said lightly, "Major General Porcelino has a great opinion, I think so too." The two looked at each other for a while, then they laughed at the same time, like two cunning foxes. Chapter 43 Eliminating All Possibilities. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The next day, Badia Island, City Hall Conference Room. After a day of intelligence collection and investigation, the final investigation meeting on the attack on the Tianlong people officially began. Everyone took their seats. The conference room seemed very quiet, and you could hear a pin drop. Only the sound of Senghua flipping through intelligence documents could be heard. Everyone else remained silent, waiting quietly. A few minutes later, Warring States closed the document, raised his head, and glanced at everyone. "Tell me your opinions." He pinched his temples. Everyone looked at each other, and in the end it was Porcelino who spoke first. He smiled and said, "I still hold the same view. Based on the surveillance video, this incident is most likely just an accident. Although the probability of attack by Neptune-type creatures is not high, it is not impossible either." Warring States rolled his eyes when he heard this, ignored the bastard's words, and turned to look at the top officer of the Beihai Navy. "Darren, what's your opinion?" Darren thought about his words and said in a deep voice. Sengoku General, I agree with Major General Porcellino's point of view. There's a saying in my hometown, when you eliminate all the impossible situations, what's left, no matter how unbelievable it is the truth. In fact, in the North Sea, there is no strong person who can destroy the official ship of the world government in an instant. We have also eliminated other possible people. In this case, the only reasonable answer is indeed the attack of the sea king-like creature. Sengoku frowned. At this time, Darren suddenly looked at Gion and Kaki. Perhaps Major Gion and Major Cake have other different ideas, that when Gion and Kaki heard this, their hearts skipped a beat, and when they faced Darren's calm gaze, they felt a little uneasy in their hearts. Do you two have any different ideas? Warring States also moved his eyes to the two of them. Jiaji opened his mouth, however, the expression of the little girl's father kneeling on the ground, crying heartbrokenly and breaking down in despair, appeared in his mind. I agree with Colonel Darren's opinion. Gion suddenly spoke coldly, her hands were clenched so tightly that her finger bones were even a little blue. Cake turned his head to look at Gion in astonishment, unable to react for a moment. Sengoku was surprised when he saw the abnormal reactions of the two people in Gion, but he quickly understood and sighed secretly in his heart. Watching the civilians who should be protected being plundered and turned into slaves by the Tianlong people, but unable to stop such atrocities, must be a heavy blow to them who advocate justice. Warring States shook his head. So, is the final truth really what Porcellino said? Thinking this, he turned to look at Porcellino, who was sitting there in a daze, and his expression suddenly became strange. He always felt that something was not right, but he couldn't put it into words. Really, a Neptune type. Temporary office. So, is this the result of your investigation, Sengoku? An attack by a Neptune-like creature. CP0, wearing a white silk robe, sat opposite Sengoku, with a cold tone, and his eyes under the strange mask stared at him hollowly. Are you sure this is not a joke? Adults will not accept such a result. Warring States felt uncomfortable under CP0's suspicious gaze and coughed lightly. Yes. As if to emphasize his credibility, he paused and added. There is a saying circulating in my hometown, when you eliminate all impossible situations, what is left, no matter how unbelievable it is the truth. CP0 said coldly. Warring States, do you think the adults will accept this conclusion? Warring States suddenly stopped talking. CP0 pondered for a moment and suddenly said. Where is the father of the little girl? I think he needs to be interrogated. He has a motive for committing the crime after all. Hearing these words, a senseless anger surged into Warring States' heart. He gritted his teeth and said. I don't think there's anything wrong with that man, he's just a civilian. He had secretly visited the little girl's father, his face was thin and his eyes were hollow. He looked as if he had lost his soul, like a zombie. This is what a middle-aged man who lost his beloved daughter should look like. What's suspicious about this? As for motivation? Of course they have motives. Hilda's saint snatched away someone's daughter forcefully. If the former was not a celestial dragon and was heavily protected, that man would definitely tear Hilda's saint into pieces even if he had a chance. However, CP0 was unmoved and just said coldly. This incident involves the world's nobles, so we cannot be too cautious. Sengoku, don't forget that this is an order from the government. You are an admiral and you should obey it unconditionally. I am executing the government's orders. Warring States interrupted CP0 unceremoniously. He supported the desk with both hands, stood up slowly from the seat, leaned forward, exuding a powerful and compelling aura, looked down at CP0 in front of him. His voice was stiff and hoarse. According to your statement, everyone on Badia Island has a motive for committing the crime. Could it be that we arrest everyone on the entire island and torture them to extract confessions? If necessary. CP0 said coldly. Warring States looked at CP0 in front of him and suddenly smiled, a bit ridiculous. I'm sorry, I can't do it. An attack by a Neptune-like creature. This is the conclusion I came up with after my investigation. As for the man who lost his daughter, he is just a pathetic person. Report it to the 5 old stars. CP0 looked at the resolute and unyielding Sengoku in front of him and was silent for a while. Good. Holy Land Marie Joya, World Government Headquarters, Zayangla, the boiling tea is constantly emitting hot steam. The 5 old stars, the highest authority in the world government, stood or sat with stern expressions on their faces, and the atmosphere was extremely oppressive. My lords, this is the answer given by warring states. The hoarse voice of CP0 came from the military phone bug. We understand, you can continue to wait for news. The blonde 5 old star said expressionlessly. Yes, my lord. Telephone bug communications were interrupted. That's ridiculous. Saint Damocles suddenly sneered. Actually, it's not impossible. The blonde 5 old star said coldly. Of course I know there is a possibility, but the Saint Shields family will not accept this result. Saint Damocles shook his head. The other 5 old stars fell into silence when they heard this, although they, as the 5 old stars, represent the interests of the world's aristocratic celestial dragons, they don't actually care about a celestial dragon who is just waiting to die. What they care about is quelling the anger of the celestial dragon family in the Holy Land. Although Hilda's saint himself is a good-for-nothing, his family has great influence in the Holy Land of Mariajoya. The so-called finding out the truth, to put it bluntly, means giving them an explanation. Perhaps, we should expand the scope of our investigation. Saint Damocles suddenly said. As soon as these words came out, the other 5 old stars all frowned. Saint Damocles' old eyes flashed with a cold light. I have experienced countless wars in my life, and I have learned a lesson, that is, there is no so-called accident in this world. The other 5 old stars raised their eyebrows. You mean? Saint Damocles sneered. Although Sengoku's investigation results are absurd, at least one of his words makes sense. When you eliminate all impossible situations, what is left, no matter how unbelievable it is the truth. Since pirates and civilians have been ruled out, there is only one possibility that will take action in the end. The other 4 people were startled. Could it be? Yes, I suspect. Well, of course it's just possible. Saint Damocles narrowed his eyes. Could the person who did it be? He slowly uttered a word that made the other 5 old stars change their expressions slightly. Navy. Ask for everything and be grateful. Chapter 44. Eliminate his suspicion first. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Navy. As the words of Damocles fell, the other 4 old stars were all startled, and then looked at the former with incomprehensible and even unbelievable eyes. Damocles, what are you suspecting? How can this be? That's the world's noble celestial dragon, that they simply don't believe that the Navy will take action against the Tianlong people, not because they don't have the ability, but because they don't dare. The Navy is the largest violent law enforcement agency under the world government. All sources of military expenditures come from the support of the world government. Although the Navy has maintained a relatively independent organization and command authority since its establishment, the government also has no weak authority in the Navy. Right to speak, not to mention the suppression of power and the constraints of the concept of dragon supremacy, military spending alone is enough for the world government to control the Navy to death. If anyone in this sea dares to attack the Tianlong people, the Navy is definitely the one who has no doubts. Damocles, are you sure your suspicion is well-founded? Once the suspicion is established, the nature of many things will change. This is an extremely sensitive topic. At this time, the bald Wulaoxing, who had been lowering his head and concentrating on wiping the long knife in his hand, suddenly spoke in a hoarse voice. He was sitting cross-legged in a samurai uniform, and the long sword with purple-black flame patterns was placed across his knees, shining with a cold light under the light of the small Western-style building, a peerless demonic sword. As he spoke, he raised his head, and gently wiped the demon knife with his skinny arm with exposed veins. His cloudy and gloomy eyes under the rimless glasses looked directly at Saint Damocles, the man who had grown up with him since childhood. Best friends who received elite education together. Colleagues, of course I am aware of your concerns. Saint Damocles said calmly, the short body actually exudes a world-swallowing courage, and the momentum is like a mountain rising from the ground, rising continuously. On the surface, it seems that the Navy does not have the possibility of attacking the Tianlong people, but this is not absolute. He sneered. After all, there are many stupid guys in the Navy who insist on their ridiculous justice. And the most important thing is that our compatriots sometimes do some outrageous things. That's the basis for suspicion. As soon as these words came out, the other 5 old stars looked sideways. Damocles. What do you mean? Don't forget that the power and status you have now are also elected by the blood of our compatriots. Watch your attitude. Saint Damocles looked at them calmly and said slowly. I don't mean to belittle, I'm just discussing the matter. I was born in the clan with the weakest power and weakest foundation among the 19 clans of Tianlong people. I have climbed all the way up to my current position. I know and understand our compatriots better than anyone else. Don't you think so? The others fell silent upon hearing this. In fact, they also know the bad nature of the so-called celestial dragons. A person who has had huge wealth, supreme power and status since birth has stood at the top of the world without any effort, character, hard work. These are naturally not among their goals in life. What they need to do, what they are keen to do, is to keep looking for all kinds of fun, and the bottom line is exceeded again and again, and finally it even reaches the level of morbid, twisted and absurd. Sometimes the bad behavior of the world's nobles is invisible to them, and they are disgusted. It's just because of the face of their fellow tribesmen and the political pressure of the Holy Land that they can't express their attitude and turn a blind eye. Damocles has no problem with investigating the Navy, but the investigation must be done with caution. At this time, the 5 old star Solomon Saint, who was wearing a warrior uniform, gently pressed the handle of the demon's sword and said in a hoarse voice, and there has to be a limit. Seeing that his best friend was the first to express his opinion, Saint Damocles laughed. He understood the meaning behind these words of Saint Solomon. It mainly contains 2 meanings. First, you can check, but you must check carefully and secretly. Second, you have to have a degree of control and just do it, otherwise it will lead to backlash. So he slowly said. This is natural, because the matter of letting Sengoku retreat has already made that guy Kong quite dissatisfied. If we let the Navy know that we are investigating them at this time, I am afraid it will cause a lot of backlash. Of course, there may not be any results in the end of the investigation. After all, we are only considering a potential possibility, and I will not hold on to this matter. The other 5 old stars heard this and exchanged looks with each other. So, where are the specific candidates? I'm afraid it's hard to use the CP department, it's too conspicuous. Once CP is used, the Navy will also be vigilant. It's best to find a candidate within the Navy for this matter. So, who is more suitable? They discussed each other word by word, and finally their eyes fell on Saint Damocles. The name Damocles is a symbol of wisdom among the elite celestial dragons of the Holy Land. It was precisely because of such a name that they finally agreed to Saint Damocles' proposal to investigate the Navy. Seeing everyone's eyes turn towards him, Damocles, the new supreme power of the world government, raised his head proudly, with a proud smile on his lips. When it comes to candidates, several conditions must be met. He analyzed it clearly. First, the candidate must be smart, cautious, and have adequate means and abilities, so that he can perfectly complete the task of secret investigation. Everyone nodded in agreement. Second, this person must have a strong desire for power. Well, it is best to be from the bottom, so that we can better control such people. The other 5 old stars thought deeply and smiled while stroking their hands. Third, this person must not have that disgusting smell of justice in his body. Saint Damocles was talking eloquently, and the light of wisdom shone in his old eyes. And the most important thing is that the ideal situation is for this person to have a very bad reputation among the people, have a bad reputation, and be groveling to the world's nobles. Only in this way can he be ruled out as a suspect in the first place. In summary, as if he had a pearl of wisdom in his hand, he quickly picked up a naval officer's file and started flipping through it, at some point, snapped. Saint Damocles slapped his hand heavily on a certain page of the file. He's the best choice. The other 5 old stars looked around, stunned for a moment, and then smiled with satisfaction. Well, he is indeed Damocles. I agree with this choice. Seconded. Agree. That page on the file, it was a handsome and arrogant naval officer with short black hair, name, Rogers Darren, position, Admiral of the Beihai Navy, Colonel of the Navy Headquarters, evaluation, extremely lustful for power, greedy for money and lust, exploiting the people, very bad reputation, nicknamed the scum of the Navy. Listening to the voices of approval from other colleagues, Saint Damocles smiled proudly. He looked at the photo of the black-haired Navy man on the file and felt that there was some connection with him, a familiar feeling. As he said before, his family is the weakest among the 19 Tianlong clans. From an early age, he was determined to be different, therefore, he diligently received the best education, experienced the cruelest training, and participated in bloody and ruthless wars incognito, suffering hundreds of major and minor injuries. He is familiar with strategy classics and has a quick mind. With his powerful force and unparalleled ingenuity among the celestial dragons, he climbed up step by step and won one merciless power war after another, and now, he has finally ascended to the position of 5 old stars. He has to prove himself, prove that you are better, wiser, stronger and more majestic than the other 5 old stars. Only then can I, without the support of the Council of Elders, sit more firmly in the newly promoted seat of the 5 old stars. Finally became the leader of the 5 old stars. And this time the attack on the Tianlong people may be a terrible disaster for others, but it was his chance. Looking at the picture on file of the dark-haired Navy with a smile on his face, Damocles seemed to see fate smiling down on him. Ask for everything and be grateful. Happy Children's Day, guys. Chapter 45. More money is needed. You are listening at novelfull.audio. North Sea, Badia Island, a private mansion. This way please, Colonel Darren is waiting for you in the living room. Flying Squirrel looked at the CP0 members who came to the door in front of him, raised his hand and made a pleased gesture. This mansion is very large, covering an area of more than 2,000 square meters. It has rockeries, gardens, fountains and even training venues and other facilities and buildings. The Flying Squirrel led the CP0 members through the lush garden, and cold sweat broke out on the palms of his hands wrapped under leather gloves. Unconsciously, CP0 came to the door in person and asked to meet Darren by name. Could it be that the government noticed something? The Flying Squirrel forced himself to calm down, subconsciously quickened his pace, and soon arrived at the door of the living room. Colonel Darren. The Flying Squirrel raised his hand in salute. In the living room, Darren, who was smoking a cigar with his legs crossed, stood up from his seat with a smile on his face and walked over enthusiastically. When distinguished guests come, it would be a shame to welcome them from afar. The mask with strange patterns covered CP0's expression, and a cold voice came from under the mask. Colonel Darren, I am here on behalf of one of the highest powers in the world government, Lord Damocles. Oh. Darren raised his eyebrows, motioned for CP0 to sit down, walked to the bar, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and added a few ice cubes to the glass. He had heard of this man. This newly promoted 5 old star was born in a weak celestial dragon family, but with his strong strength and resourcefulness, he won most of the votes in a celestial dragon meeting in the Holy Land, and became the highest power in the world government in one fell swoop. I have to say, it is indeed a touching and legendary story. That's the name. It sounds a bit taboo. According to legend, the sword of Damocles represents great power, is very unsafe and can be easily taken away, or simply put, the fear of the end of the world. I wonder what Saint Damocles ordered. Darren handed CP0 a glass of whiskey, sat down and took a sip, seemingly casually. CP0 didn't drink, he just put the glass down and glanced at the Flying Squirrel expressionlessly. Flying Squirrel saluted again, turned and walked out of the living room, closing the door. CP0 then took out a top-secret military telephone bug from his arms, placed it on the smooth table, and dialed a signal. Bulu bulu. Military telephone bugs chirped. Seeing this scene, Darren narrowed his eyes. Is it so secret that you have to talk to Wulaoxing directly? If he were not 100% sure that he had left absolutely no evidence or traces, he would have begun to wonder if the government was going to touch him. Soon the phone bug communication was connected. Swish, a picture was suddenly projected from the phone bug. In the small foreign-style building full of elegance but dignity, 5 old figures were standing or sitting, looking at the naval captain with a strange look. Seeing this scene, Darren immediately put down his wine glass with fear, stood up from his seat, bowed slightly and said, "Rogers Darren, Colonel of the Navy Headquarters and Admiral of the North Sea, has met Lord Wulaoxing." When the 5 old stars saw Darren's actions, they all sneered. "Okay, don't act here. We all know what kind of person you are. The notorious scum in the Navy." Darren smiled slightly. "My lords, thank you very much." Wulaoxing, Darren smiled and said, "I wonder what the purpose of Mr. Wulaoxing's contact with his subordinates is. The Warring States General is also on Badia Island. His subordinates can look for him at any time. No need." St. Damocles waved his hand to interrupt Darren. "It is not appropriate for the Warring States period to know about this." He looked at the Navy captain seriously. "Concerning the attack on the Beihai Tianlong people, we have another opinion." Darren frowned and said tentatively, "My lord, what you mean is..." St. Damocles sneered. "We order you to start a secret investigation from now on the sailing situation of warships within the Navy at the time of the incident, as well as the movements of all naval forces with flying or similar flying capabilities. You are the top officer of the Beihai Navy. It should not be difficult to find out this information." Hearing these words, Darren opened his eyes wide with astonishment on his face. "What are you guys suspecting?" St. Damocles said calmly. "You know very well what we are suspicious of. If you still want to continue to be the Admiral of Beihai, then obey the orders honestly." Darren's face suddenly turned gloomy. "My lords, are you asking me to investigate my colleagues? I'm a member of the Navy. Are you asking me to investigate my comrades? My lords, are you asking me to betray my partners and betray their trust in me?" The 5 old stars all frowned. "So you're saying you want to disobey the government?" Darren took a deep breath and said in a deep voice. "No, I mean..." He clenched his fists and said fiercely, "The rank of colonel in our headquarters is too low." When the 5 old stars heard this, they were stunned at the same time, their faces full of astonishment, as if they had heard something ridiculous. "This kid, is he asking for power from them face to face? A mere naval colonel dared to ask for power from the 5 old stars, the highest authority in the world government. Ha 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 ha." St. Damocles suddenly laughed and stared at Darren with admiration. "Very good, I really saw you right. The Navy is the face of the world government and the dog in the hands of the celestial dragons. For them, the more ambitious the dog and the better the appetite, the easier it is to control. The biggest headache for Wulaoxing is those hardcore people who are loyal to their personal beliefs and are indifferent to oil and salt. Go for it, Darren Brat. With your talents, the rank of colonel in this headquarters is indeed a bit unfair." After Damocles said this, he gave Darren a meaningful look and immediately hung up the phone. The screen then disappears. CP0 immediately put away the phone bug and stood up. "Don't you want a drink?" Darren smiled and said. "After all, we will all be colleagues working for the adults from now on." CP0 hesitated for a moment, picked up the wine glass and took a sip, then quietly disappeared and gradually disappeared in place, like a ghost. When CP0 disappeared, the smile on Darren's face gradually disappeared. A purple-blue electric arc suddenly jumped between his fingers, an invisible magnetic field fluctuation spread out instantly. "Well, there is no life magnetic field signature of CP0. After confirming that CP0 had left, Darren tapped the table gently. The flying squirrel outside the door strode in. "What happened?" Darren lit a cigar and said calmly. The world government began to wonder if the Navy was responsible for the attack on the celestial dragons. Just now, the 5 old stars personally came to talk to me and raised suspicions. It should be the newly promoted 5 old stars. St. Damocles. The flying squirrel's pupils shrank. Damocles, the supreme authority of the world government known for his wisdom, at the recent coronation ceremony of the 5 old stars, the master of ceremonies read out in public the meaning of the name given by his father. The sword, which means the supreme judgment, hangs on the top of the world and makes everyone surrender. It symbolizes the ultimate divine power of all rights and interests. Did they really find something? Darren smiled and shook his head and interrupted. Don't be nervous, they are just suspicious. They asked me to start a covert investigation against everyone in the Navy. Now we're in trouble, damn it. The flying squirrel cursed subconsciously, but felt something was wrong as soon as he said the words. Etc. He stared at the smiling Darren in front of him with disbelief. You said, they asked you to investigate. Darren exhaled a dragon-like smoke from his mouth, with a smile on his face. Yes, they asked me to investigate. He bites the word I hard. It is indeed a wise decision. Darren blinked. After all, a Navy scum with a notorious reputation, a reputation for bullying, and a worship of power would never be able to attack the celestial dragons, right? When the flying squirrel heard this, his face turned red and his expression was extremely weird. What is this? Directly eliminate the correct answer. I'm asking for all your support. If you guys think it looks good, please give it a thumbs up. I'd be very grateful. Chapter 46 Wisdom, but not much. You are listening at navalfull.audio. So, what are you going to do? Do you really want to investigate the Navy? Flying squirrel's eyebrows twisted into the character Chuan, and he subconsciously lit a cigar, looking at the naval colonel in front of him with some worry. Although this was an order directly issued by the highest authority of the world government, the object of the investigation was, after all, his own navy. In any case, Flying Squirrel was still somewhat resistant to this so-called order in his heart. Check, why not check? Darren lifted the wine glass to his lips with a relaxed expression, took a sip, and smiled sarcastically. That is an order directly issued by the great and respected Lord Wulaoxing. Of course, we must do it beautifully for them. It's just that now that the investigation of the dragon attack incident is in my hands, we can take the initiative. The flying squirrel glanced at him and couldn't help but feel a little funny. What has to be said is that Saint Damocles, who is known as the most resourceful person in a century, was able to keenly detect the clues of this attack and indeed had extraordinary wisdom, but not much. Let the murderer catch the murderer. The corner of Flying Squirrel's mouth twitched. However, this matter should not be delayed any longer. This investigation must be concluded as soon as possible. Darren took a deep drag on his cigar, his deep eyes sparkling. After all, until this case is over, CP0 and the investigation team will not leave Beihai. I don't like this feeling of being watched. The flying squirrel nodded in understanding. Because of the arrival of the investigation team, many of their recent actions have come to a halt. After all, with the general of the Warring States period, it was hard to do too much in many things. The next day, Beihai Island Municipal Government Office. Meeting room. What? The attack on the celestial dragons will be fully investigated by Darren. Warring States looked at the government order document that CP0 took out in front of him. His face was full of astonishment, and he couldn't help but exclaimed. Dion and Cake seemed to have heard something ridiculous, and turned to stare at Darren with their mouths open. CP0, wearing a mask and a white silk robe, read out the government's order in an indifferent tone. In view of the heavy military workload of Admiral Sengoku of the Navy headquarters and the imminent pursuit of the great pirate Bundy Waldo, the investigation of the Dragon attack incident will be fully transferred to the highest officer of the North Sea Navy, Admiral Rogers Darren of the North Sea. Effective immediately. After reading out the document, CP0 gave Darren a cold look. The task is urgent. Colonel Darren, please start investigating as soon as possible. Darren smiled and nodded. Do not worry. CP0 nodded and was about to leave. Warring States suddenly expressed his dissatisfaction. Haven't I already submitted the results of my investigation? This incident was a complete accident. The person who attacked Hilda's saint was a creature like the Sea King. His voice gradually dropped and became hesitant, because CP0 was staring at him coldly with a looking at an idiot look. Seeing Singwa sit back in a sullen manner, CP0 said nothing, and his figure gradually turned into nothingness and disappeared in place. In the conference room, only a group of Marines were left sitting there. There was silence and silence. Cake and Guillaume exchanged vague glances. Why did the investigative power fall into Darren's hands? Jiaji's eyes widened. How do I know that this is a direct order from the government? Guillaume Lu frowned. Jiaji raised his eyebrows. Could it be that the murder of the heavenly dragon Saint Hilda's saint was really not his fault? I always feel like things are not that simple. Guillaume narrowed his eyes. Plus total. Hey, what are you two doing with such weird expressions and grinning teeth? Warring States said angrily. Guillaume and Cake immediately sat up straight. Perhaps Major Guillaume and Major Cake have some new perspectives on the investigation of the attack. The two people in Guillaume shuddered when they heard this. They raised their heads and saw Admiral Beihai, who was smoking a cigar, staring at them with a half-smiling look. They felt a little panicked for no reason. No. Jiaji smiled sarcastically. After hitting the two thorns, Darren smiled and looked back. Darren, what do you think about this matter? Why did the government give you the power of investigation? At this time, Warring States stared at Darren with a serious face and said in a deep voice. Darren pondered for a moment and said slowly. General Warring States, I think the government's decision is reasonable. Oh. Warring States frowned. Darren continued. The investigation into the attack on the Tianlongs has been delayed for too long. As a general of the Navy headquarters, you have heavy military duties. Naturally, you are not suitable to continue to lead the investigation. It is a waste of time. Warring States pinched his temples and sighed. In this case, they should accept my investigation results, so that the case can be closed early. He suddenly glanced at Darren suspiciously. Or is it that your boy has some brand new information and clues? Darren raised his hands in surrender. Of course not. Personally, I still agree with Major General Porcellino's view. He smiled and nodded to Porcellino. The attack on the Tianlong people was essentially an accident. Warring States narrowed his eyes, a trace of doubt flashed deep in his eyes, and murmured to himself. Since there are no new clues, the government has no reason to transfer the investigation power away from me. That's great. This saves you a lot of trouble. At this time, Porcellino, who was picking his nails with a nail clipper next to him, suddenly murmured in a low voice with a smile. The speaker seems to be unintentional, but the listener is intentional. When Warring States heard this, his eyes suddenly lit up. Yes. This is a good thing. Originally, he didn't want to take a trip into this muddy water. After all, it was a thankless task. Now that the investigation is fully handled by Darren, can he, a naval admiral, continue to do his own business? Whether it's returning to the headquarters of Marineland or continuing to hunt for Bundy Waldo, it's not much better than staying here and busying around a dead Draco. Thinking of this, Warring States laughed with satisfaction. He raised his head, coughed slightly, and said to Darren with a serious look. Well, since the government relies so much on you, Darren, you must also perform well and not let down the government's trust in you. Darren smiled humbly. We still need more guidance from the Warring States General. The smile on Xinggua's face grew stronger. He stood up and patted Darren on the shoulder. Then this matter will trouble you. That evening, Darren finished his daily practice at the training ground and walked to his private residence on Badia Island, sweating profusely. Sunset dusk, Darren's military uniform was in tatters and hung on his body like rags. The contours of the muscles were carved like a knife, and there were many shallow craters and blackened dirt left on the sweaty skin. These were the marks of frontal bombardment by bullets and artillery. You really haven't changed at all. A slow voice suddenly sounded from behind. Darren paused, curled his lips, and turned around. A tall figure stood in the setting sun, with his arms folded across his chest and his body leaning against the wall. His broad cloak was illuminated blood red in the setting sun. He looked at Darren's blood-stained and scar-covered body, his eyes under his sunglasses flashing with a strange smile. Aren't you tired of living like a beast every day? Darren threw a cigar casually, lit one for himself, smiled and said. Not everyone has the talent of a monster like you, Major General Porcellino. Ask for everything and be grateful. Chapter 47 got promoted. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Upon hearing this, Porcellino raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. How could it be? You are a man recognized by Sakaski. Why does this sound so wrong? Darren dusted off his hands. Porcellino looked at him deeply and suddenly grinned. So the government is getting suspicious, that is expected of a guy as smart as a monkey. He noticed something so quickly. Such a thought flashed through Darren's mind instantly. As a time traveler, Darren has a certain understanding of the original plot, but this guy Porcellino is still someone he can't even see through. Even when this guy was performing his duties in Beihai, Darren, as his subordinate, had worked with him for a period of time, but he still couldn't understand Porcellino's position. Ambiguous justice, is it justice? Of course, what is certain is that this guy hides very well and will never get into any trouble. Countless thoughts flashed through Darren's mind, but his face maintained the same smile as before. I'm just following orders. Porcellino opened his mouth slightly in an exaggerated manner, scratched his head and said. This is really strange. He looked at Darren with a deep look in his eyes. But this is understandable. After all, you are the least suspicious. This bastard who doesn't take things too seriously. The corners of Darren's mouth twitched slightly. He was certain that Porcellino might have guessed something and was testing himself further. What I have to say is that this guy Porcellino's smile really deserves a beating. Of course. Darren smiled lightly. Since you're testing me, I will not make it easy for you. It's just that I thought about it later, and I seem to remember something else about the Tianlong attack. Oh? Porcellino asked in feigned surprise. What is it then? That he looked at Darren with a teasing look on his face. I thought you had the same idea as me, that the celestial dragons were attacked by Neptune-like creatures. Who knows? People's minds change. Darren shrugged. Porcellino tilted his head. So what are your thoughts now? Darren smiled and held up a finger. First, in the attack on the Tianlong people, the attackers had powerful attack power and could destroy the official ship in an instant. Porcellino looked at Darren, nodded and smiled. Yes, it is. Darren ignored this guy's connotative eyes and just raised his second finger. Secondly, based on the time of the crime, the attacker must have been in Beihai at the time of the crime. Porcellino said nothing, still keeping that damn smile. Looking at Darren, Darren raised his third finger. Third, I have sent people to check the registered warships and ships in the North Sea, and found that there is nothing special, so the attacker is likely to have the ability to fly at high speed. To sum up, Major General Porcellino. I think of a person who can meet these three conditions. Oh. So who is it? Porcellino asked with a disapproving smile, only to find that the Navy colonel was staring directly at him. The smile on his face suddenly stopped. Ha 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 ha, just kidding. Darren suddenly laughed. He didn't know why, but seeing this yellow-skinned monkey deflated, he felt an indescribable feeling of relief all over his body. Of course I'm on the same side as you, Major General Porcellino. After saying this, Darren turned around and walked into the private residence, waving coolly from behind. Go to rest early, Major General Porcellino. Tomorrow you and the Warring States General can sail again. I will see you off then. Under the setting sun, Porcellino stood motionless. The exaggerated sunglasses clearly reflected Darren's retreating back, and the cooling breeze ruffled the large cloak behind him. It's getting more and more interesting, Darren. He muttered. The corner of his mouth slowly raised an interesting arc again. The next day. Badia Island, port. The North Sea Navy team headed by Darren has blocked the port and held a grand and lively farewell ceremony for the sailing Navy Admiral. Flowers were piled on both sides of the street, and the Navy lined up in a square formation and fired a gun salute. The salutes and fireworks rose into the sky with brilliant colors, making the accompanying Navy men on the Warring States ship watch with great interest and full of pride. You brat, clean up these useless things. Warring States scolded Darren complainingly, but his old face was already smiling like a chrysanthemum. Darren bowed slightly and said gracefully, "This has nothing to do with subordinates. This was organized voluntarily by the Beihai Navy to show their admiration for the Warring States General." "You kid." Zhang smiled and waved his hand, feeling that Darren was becoming more and more pleasing to his eyes, able to handle things, know how to work, have a sincere attitude, be able to share your worries, be smart and considerate, and the most important thing is that you have a good image and are pleasing to the eye. Look at your adjutant again. Before his boss even boarded the warship, he was already lying on the beach chair on the deck, enjoying the sun and watermelon juice. Who is the Admiral of the Navy? Remembering that he had to face Porcelino's wretched face every day after setting sail, Sengoku's mood suddenly worsened, and he sighed with melancholy. "There is a strange atmosphere around you every day, and you always say it's so scary when I see anything. It makes you angry just looking at it. I was really blind before I chose this guy as my adjutant." Buru bulu, buru bulu. At this time, the phone bug in Warring States' arms suddenly called. He was stunned for a moment, took out his phone, and connected the signal. Warring States. A hoarse voice came from it. Hearing this voice, Warring States' heart suddenly sank, and he solemnly said, "Sir Damocles, regarding the attack on the celestial dragons." He subconsciously thought that Wulaoxing was here to urge the investigation, so he opened his mouth to defend himself. "No, that matter has been settled." Damocles in telephone bugs is obviously in a good mood, with a rare smile. "Admiral Darren of Beihai has submitted the closing document, and we are very satisfied with the results of his investigation. Warring States, you did a great job. Darren pointed out during the investigation that without your guidance, he would not have been able to find out the truth behind this incident." Warring States. He listened blankly, confused. "The investigation results are out? When? How long has it been?" "It's less than a day. But it's obvious that Darren has been staying on Badia Island all this time." Warring States couldn't help but move his eyes to Darren, but the latter bowed towards him humbly and smiled without saying a word. "Warring States, did you hear that?" Before waiting for Sengoku's response, Damocles said something displeased on the phone. "Hey, I heard it." Warring States suddenly came to his senses and replied, "Well, this time, the government is satisfied with your performance." Saint Damocles spoke with an appreciative voice. "You are indeed worthy of the name of wise general." Warring States was confused when he heard it, but faced with the praise from the 5 old stars, he couldn't help but smile with some pride. "Your Excellency, you are so complimentary. Well, let's stop here. By the way, that boy Darren is very good." Damocles paused and added, "With his talent, the rank of colonel in this headquarters is indeed a bit underwhelming." Warring States naturally heard what Wulaoxing meant and immediately said in a deep voice, "Colonel Darren has passed the review of the officer training camp, and after completing his duties, he will go to the headquarters of Marineland for training. His outstanding performance has been obvious to all our senior leaders in the Navy, and we will never waste any potential talent." "That's good." After the words fell, the phone bug communication was hung up. Warring States stared blankly at the sleeping military phone bug in his hand. After a few seconds, he suddenly reacted, turned to stare at Darren, and gritted his teeth and said, "You brat, when did you find out the truth?" Darren smiled and said, "Yes, this is all thanks to the guidance of the Warring States General." Sengoku rolled his eyes angrily. "Unknowingly, I owed this boy a favor." "Who is the murderer?" Darren said, "Of course. World Destroyer Bundy Waldo." Warring States. "What?" He said with disbelief on his face. He was so stunned that he almost bit his tongue. Bundy Waldo obviously didn't have time to commit the crime. "When the crime occurred, he was being pursued by me." Sengoku's words stopped abruptly. He seemed to realize something and looked at Darren blankly. I saw the latter lighting a cigarette lightly and smiling meaningfully. "Who cares about the truth?" This sentence exploded in Xingua's brain like a thunder. "Yeah, who cares about the truth? There were no witnesses to the attack, and the Navy kept information secret, in other words, except for the top management of the headquarters and a very small number of people. Most people in this sea did not know that a celestial dragon was dead. The reason why the government asked itself to investigate as soon as possible was that it needed a justifiable conclusion to deal with the celestial dragon family on the holy land of Mariajoya. What they want is not the truth, at least it wasn't. The absurd-sounding truth, like being attacked by a sea king. Darren's investigation results perfectly solved this problem. On the surface, Shield Saint was killed by the great pirate world destroyer Bundy Waldo, which could divert the pressure on the family from the Holy Land. For the Saint Shield's family, being killed by a big pirate is always easier to accept than being attacked by a sea king for no reason. In fact, the truth of the incident was indeed found out, and it was just an accident. Such a survey result has both dignity and face. The Navy can communicate with the world government, and the world government can also communicate with the Holy Land. This is a solution that satisfies everyone. Well, except Bundy Waldo himself, etc. If that guy knew that he had killed a celestial dragon, he would probably be very satisfied. It's an ending that really satisfies everyone, and what he has to do now is to bring Bundy Waldo, the murderer and criminal who dares to kill the celestial dragons, to justice. This is what I want to do. The more Warring States thought about it, the brighter his eyes became. Darren is such a genius. Ha 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 ha. You did a great job, boy. He suddenly laughed heartily and patted Darren on the shoulder with relief on his face. I'll leave the investigation of this incident to you. I really saw the right person. Guion and Kaki next to him heard a dark line. Since when has it been your decision to leave the investigation to Darren? Isn't it an order from the world government? But they didn't dare to say it. Well, now it seems that the colonel of our headquarters is indeed a bit underserved. Warring States looked at Darren and smiled with satisfaction. When I return to the headquarters, I will apply to Marshal Kong. He winked at Darren. Congratulations, Brigadier General Rogers Darren. As soon as these words came out, Guion and Cake were immediately dumbfounded, with disbelief on their faces and their brains buzzing, especially Jiaji. His eyes were as if they were popping out of their sockets. Brigadier General of this headquarters. This is a general-level officer. This guy Darren, apparently killed a world noble, a celestial dragon, and got promoted in the end. Big chapter, please support me, thank you very much. Chapter 48 Admiral Beihai's Condolences and Condolences. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At this moment, Guion and Cake suddenly felt that the world in front of them was so absurd, like falling into a dream. Their lips opened and closed slightly, but no words came out. This is wrong no matter how you look at it. He clearly killed a celestial dragon. Even if he was careful enough not to be caught, there is no way he would be promoted because of it. Although they were just guessing, there was no substantial evidence to prove that Darren was the murderer of Shield Saint. Darren is a guy who really plays the game of power and politics to the extreme. He clearly and keenly captured the political needs of the world government and easily solved this problem that gave even the Warring States generals a headache. Looking back, with Darren's level of power and scheming, wouldn't it be easy for the two of them to disappear quietly into the North Sea? The moment this idea emerged, the two of them couldn't help but look at Darren with a bit of fear in their eyes. Then I would like to thank the Warring States General for his support in advance. Darren was keenly aware of the changing expressions of the two little thorns, Guion and Cake. A faint smile appeared on his face, and he raised his hand toward Sengoku and saluted with a straight military salute. Well, very good, very energetic. Warring States laughed with satisfaction. Then I will leave first. He glanced at Cake and Guion who were at a loss next to him, thought for a moment and added. I'll leave it to you to take care of these two little guys. Darren smiled and readily agreed. No problem, Warring States General. So Sengoku turned around and boarded the warship. Amidst the fierce salutes and farewells of the Beihai Navy officers, the ship Sengoku of the Navy headquarters Admiral Sengoku slowly raised its sails. The strong sea breeze blew up the sails, making them swell, and the word justice in flying phoenixes appeared solemn and vigorous. Set sail. On the observation deck of the warship, a young sailor shouted loudly, the rudder rose, the anchor turned, and the warship, as huge as a sea fortress, sailed out of the port against the cool sea breeze. Warring States finally saluted the Beihai Navy headed by Darren at the port. High-spirited, he immediately turned around and saw the figure lying there on the deck basking in the sun, and the corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. Warring States soon noticed a large number of large and small wooden boxes at the rear of the cabin. "Porcelino, what is this?" he shouted. When Porcelino heard the sound, he slowly stood up from the recliner and walked over while stretching. "This." He rubbed the stubble on his chin and smiled. "This is Colonel Darren's farewell gift to you." Warring States was stunned for a moment, and suddenly a bad premonition came over him, and his expression became stern. That brat Darren, could he be giving himself money? This is not easy to deal with. He quickly walked forward and opened all the piles of large and small wooden boxes. The moment he saw what was in the box clearly, Zengguo was slightly startled. Cigars, scallops, tea, donuts, spirits, fruits, a dazzling array of merchandise filled one side of the cabin. Warring States looked at the mountains of merchandise, and his originally stern eyes gradually softened. The gifts are not expensive, they are all mid-level brands, and ordinary families can afford them. The cigar is the brand that Marshal Kong likes to smoke, Senbei is the kind I like to eat, jasmine tea is Xiaohe's favorite, Cap cannot live a day without donuts, the wine is Zifa's favorite sherry, fruit is the most important supply after fresh water and food during long-distance voyages, and it can prevent sepsis. Warring States stood in front of the pile of small gifts, silent for a long time, then suddenly smiled and shook his head. "You're so thoughtful, Darren, that brat." He was somewhat emotional, but the next second he suddenly changed his face, jumped to his feet and roared. "Porcelino, you bastard! What are you doing?" Porcelino, who was reaching for a handful of bananas, paused and his hand hovered in midair. "I want to eat some fruit, Warring States General." Sengoku looked at Porcelino's innocent face and felt very angry. "This is Darren's gift to me." Porcelino was stunned, then helplessly raised his hands in surrender. "Okay." He turned around and muttered in a low voice. "I'm getting more and more stingy." The corners of Sengoku's mouth twitched crazily. Red Continent, Holy Land, Marie Joya, World Government, Xiaoyangla. "My lords, this is the secret investigation result submitted by Beihai Admiral Darren." A CP0 wearing a pale silk robe knelt on one knee and respectfully presented a document. The 5 old stars looked at each other. "You're so fast, Darren, that little brat. His talent is indeed very good. Damocles, your vision is indeed as accurate as ever." When Saint Damocles heard the approval from his colleagues, a proud smile appeared on his lips. That Navy brat Darren did not disappoint. In just one day, he found a solution that satisfied everyone. But Damocles, why did the Shield's family suddenly become quiet in the Holy Land? Solomon Saint, who was wiping his purple-black magical katana, suddenly asked. Hearing this, the other 5 elder stars also looked at Saint Damocles. Although the solution proposed by Darren was quite ingenious and gave them a reason to withstand the pressure of the Holy Land Council of Elders, the Shield Saint family was not an easy man. Among the Celestial Dragon clan in the Holy Land, they are famous for being arrogant, rude, paranoid, twisted and extremely greedy. Saint Damocles smiled and said, 3 hours ago, a merchant ship from the North Sea entered the inland sea of the Red Earth continent and passed numerous inspections before entering the land of the gods. More than 1 billion baileys of gold and silver treasures, as well as countless rare and special products from the North Sea, were moved from that merchant ship and then sent to the residence of the Hilda's Saint family. The manager of the caravan submitted a letter to Shield Saint's father. The content of the letter probably said, North Sea Admiral Rogers Darren expressed his heavy condolences for the loss of Shield Saint's family, and I am deeply saddened and would like to offer my thin condolences to the great Tianlong people. Having said this, Saint Damocles' smile turned sarcastic. It is said that 10 minutes after receiving this condolence money, the CP department received an escort order from the world's nobles. Shield Saint's father, Hilda Saint, is now on his way to the Happy Street of the New World. Point 4 Old Stars, note, Happy Street, a famous illegal zone in the New World, the largest red light district in Kabuki Street in the One Piece world. Chapter 49 Tianlong people are also valuable. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I see. The other 5 old stars looked at each other, and finally smiled bitterly without saying anything. For the Tianlong people, the so-called bloodline is very important, but it is not that important. There is never mercy or mercy from the superior, only interests are eternal. Anyway, something like a son can have a few more at any time. What a sensible kid. This saves us a lot of time. 1 billion Baileys is not a small amount. Indeed. The 5 old stars gave their comments one by one. St. Damocles smiled and said, Darren is a very smart kid. Maybe after this incident, we can maintain some contact with him for a long time. Hearing this, the eyes of the other 5 old stars lit up slightly. This is a good idea. Anyone can see that Darren, the North Sea Admiral, will sooner or later enter the ranks of the Navy's top decision-makers. With his talents, becoming an admiral might just be a matter of time. At that time, there will be a naval admiral who directly obeys the orders of the world government, and their control over the Navy will be greatly increased, and they will also be able to play a monitoring role over other generals in the Navy. Damocles saw the changes in the expressions of several colleagues and sneered in his heart. He has been ranked as the highest authority in the world government, and his power is overwhelming. A casual order or a casual look can cause the destruction of a country, but he was not satisfied with this. His name is Damocles, the legendary sword that represents the authority of God. His ultimate goal is the seat of the head of the 5 old stars. However, unlike other 5 old stars, the family behind St. Damocles does not have great influence and power in the Holy Land. The support and foundation of the Holy Land are far inferior to those of several colleagues. If he wants to step into that below one-person position, he must enlist external forces. As the largest violent law enforcement agency under the world government, the Navy is his breakthrough point. Starting from the support of Darren, he quickly ascended to the position of real power in the Navy, and gradually took the power of the Navy into his own hands step by step. By then, your voice in the world government will naturally be greatly increased. But before that, let's take a look at the results of this investigation. Damocles smiled and changed the subject, slowly opening the file in his hand. Beihai, Branch 321, Base Chief's Office. After seeing off warring states, Darren took Flying Squirrel and others back directly from Badia Island. So, are you sure there are no problems in the Holy Land? That the Flying Squirrel looked at Darren sitting there calmly and smoking a cigar, and finally couldn't restrain his curiosity and asked. Darren blew out a dragon-like white smoke from his mouth, narrowed his eyes and smiled. I sent a very heartfelt condolence to the Shield Saint family and they couldn't refuse it. When he said the word sincere, he deliberately emphasized his tone. What condolences? Flying Squirrel asked blankly. 1 billion Baileys. What? The Flying Squirrel gasped, unable to believe his ears. 1 billion Baileys. This is not a small amount of money. This is already a whole year's tax revenue for many small and medium-sized kingdoms. Looking at the entire North Sea, the taxes collected by Darren and others by supporting countless mafia families and underworld forces add up to just over 2 billion Baileys a year. And now, in order to send a condolence, their Beihai Navy has worked for half a year in vain. Not to mention that in their original plans, let alone in their plans and expectations, the establishment of the North Sea Naval Fleet requires resources and funds that are a bottomless pit. Are you crazy? The Flying Squirrel looked at the calm Darren with a helpless face. As Darren's adjutant, he acts as a steward and staff officer. Seeing Darren spending money like this, Flying Squirrel's heart seemed to be bleeding. It's all worth it. Darren flicked the ashes from his cigarette. You can make more money if you don't have it, but not everyone has the opportunity to give gifts to the celestial dragons. If I hadn't taken the Damocles route this time, the merchant ship I sent wouldn't even be qualified to enter the inland sea of the Red Earth continent. 0.1 billion Baileys is indeed a terrifying astronomical figure. You must know that it is only the year 1492 of the sea calendar. The era of great pirates has not yet begun. Inflation is far less terrifying than that of later generations, and Bailey's purchasing power is still strong. Even a legendary pirate like Bundy Waldo, known as the Destroyer of Worlds, Has a bounty of only 200 million Baileys, 1 billion Baileys, which is equivalent to 5 Bundy Waldos, but Darren thinks the money is well spent. In this world, strength always comes first. In addition, the second most important thing is power, not money. The flying squirrel heard Darren's answer, thought about it carefully, and found that it made sense, but it still hurt a little. It's still too expensive. Is it expensive? Darren looked up at him and suddenly smiled. At least I think it's quite interesting. The flying squirrel asked doubtfully, what do you mean? Darren raised his head and took a puff of his cigar. The Tianlong people have the supreme power in the world and can plunder and buy and sell people, anyone, like pigs, dogs and beasts. For them, money is the standard for measuring everything. But this time, it shows one thing. He paused and said with a mocking smile. It turns out that the lives of Tianlong people also have a price. The flying squirrel smiled silently when he heard this. This unique brain circuit can only be imagined by Darren, a freak who is full of rebellion and madness in his heart. After a while, the flying squirrel thought of something and asked slowly. As for the internal investigation of the Navy. Darren smiled and said. The report has been submitted, and I will provide everything the government needs unconditionally. The navigation conditions of various warships and the positions of naval officers at the time of the incident, well, that naturally includes our Beihai Navy. The flying squirrel frowned and said, what about you? Darren seemed to be smiling but not smiling. I, the Admiral of the North Sea, was of course stationed on Badia Island when the incident occurred, and I was adhering to my duties. On this point, everyone in the North Sea Navy fleet, as well as members of the inspection team from the Navy headquarters. Major Cake and Major Guillaume can all testify for me. Yeah, perfect alibi. With that, Darren put out his cigar and put on his Navy cape. Let's go. Now that the men in the headquarters are gone, it's time for us to get to work. The flying squirrel said in astonishment. Where to go? Darren pushed the door open without any hesitation. The cold sea breeze blew the cloak behind him like a wild tornado. The money lost from one celestial dragon must be recovered from another celestial dragon. The flying squirrel was startled for a moment when he heard this, and then understood instantly. A name flashed through his mind. Don Quixote da Flamingo. Ask for everything, thank you very much. Chapter 50. You have crossed the line. You are listening at novelfull.audio. North Sea, Rubeck Island. The sky was dark and sad. Bang bang bang, rumble, guns and artillery roared continuously in the town, and hundreds of figures were fighting crazily on the streets. The civilians were screaming in terror, running around with their heads in their hands, and their cries were endless. Building after building burst into flames under the gunfire and collapsed. The high-temperature flames turned into huge fiery red wings, licking the belly of the sky. Damn the Don Quixote family. Rubeck Island is the territory of our Phil's family. You have crossed the line. A man wearing a newsboy cap, a black coat, and a suit slashed the throat of a pirate who rushed in front of him, and roared angrily. His face was splattered with the pirate's blood, his white shirt was stained red, and his blood-red eyes were staring at the blonde kid not far away. He is about 11 or 12 years old, only about 1.4 meters tall, with short blonde hair, wearing a pair of sunglasses, a white shirt and cropped pants. He was obviously a young brat, but he had a crazy and cruel smile on his face that even he, the leader of a gangster family, was afraid of. Don Quixote da Flamingo. A kid who appears out of nowhere and is ruthless and cold-blooded, with strong strength. He led his Don Quixote family to continuously cause troubles when they first arrived in Beihai. They had brutally eradicated the well-known mafia families on several nearby islands and took all the territory that originally belonged to them. Recruiting troops and horses, and its power expanded crazily at an alarming rate. When Doflamingo heard Fier's words, it seemed as if he had heard some ridiculous joke. He covered his abdomen with laughter and leaned back and forth. Several Don Quixote family cadres next to him couldn't help laughing. Toripol, who was covered in slime, holding a cane, and with 2 lines of snot hanging from his nostrils. Pika stood there like an iron tower, with muscles all over his body. Diamante, dressed like a native Indian with colorful paint on her face, Dot and Virgo, who still had a piece of steak on his face and a dull expression. Crossing the line, Doflamingo grinned ferociously, looking confident and exaggerated. No, 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 I didn't cross the line. Phils looked at the wailing family members who continued to fall around him, and his heart became more and more anxious. After recruiting troops and horses during this period of time, the power of the Don Quixote family has far surpassed that of the Phils family in terms of personal strength and weapons configuration. If they continue like this, they will all be wiped out by the Don Quixote family in less than 10 minutes. He gripped the long knife dripping with blood, gritted his teeth and said, "The territory of the gangs is clearly divided, they maintain stability with each other, and they must not cross the line. This is the rule of Beihai," Doflamingo said with a cruel smile. "No, you still don't understand me. The so-called rules are the restraints defined by the strong for the weak. They are cages used to imprison the incompetent, mediocre, waste and garbage. I didn't cross the line." He stuck out his tongue and licked the corners of his chapped mouth, opened his arms, raised his head and laughed cruelly. "Because, the entire Beihai is in my possession. The rules of this world are meaningless to me, Doflamingo." As he laughed loudly, hundreds of members of the Don Quixote family also laughed ferociously. Holding spears, artillery, battle axes and knives in their hands, they surged into the Phils family like a group of hungry beasts. In an instant, swords clashed and blood splashed, a dazzling and deep blood-red color slowly bloomed in the originally bustling streets. "You are looking for death." Phils shouted angrily with his eyes splitting when he saw this. He stepped on the ground, and as the floor shattered, his figure actually crossed a distance of more than 10 meters at an extremely fast speed, and in the blink of an eye he was in front of the arrogant blonde kid. The blood-stained sword in his hand was clenched with both hands, and he slashed hard towards Doflamingo's face. The explosive force was so powerful that even the traces of the blade cutting through the air produced white air waves. A flash of killing intent flashed in Phil's eyes. He could even foresee that the mind of this ignorant blonde kid in front of him would be cut in two under his own knife. However, at the moment when the long knife was about to fall, Phil's pupils suddenly shrank. He saw the sneer from Doflamingo's face, as well as the faces of his subordinates. They all showed teasing smiles like a cat catching a mouse. Kang. A bright spark suddenly bloomed in front of his eyes. Phil's bloodshot pupils trembled violently, and a look of disbelief flooded his face. His sword suddenly stopped 3 centimeters away from Doflamingo's forehead, and could no longer be cut down. It was as if there was something invisible in the void, blocking his sword. The location of its collision even made a sharp and harsh friction sound, like the sound of swords wrestling. How can this be? Phil's throat rolled, and it was extremely dry. Seeing the half-smiling expression of the blonde kid in front of him, his heart suddenly started beating wildly, as if being tightly held by an invisible hand. It's really frustrating. Doflamingo laughed strangely and suddenly twitched his fingers like chicken claws. Phil's pupils shrank to tiny needles. The sound of a sharp blade cutting through the air suddenly exploded. The moment there was a sudden sound of breaking through the air, his chest seemed to have been cut open by an invisible sword, exploding into large pieces of blood. Laugh. Hot blood spurted out from the bone-deep wounds on his chest and splashed on Doflamingo's face, making his young and arrogant face look as ferocious and terrifying as a devil. Phil's face turned pale little by little, and he slowly fell to the ground. The gurgling blood spread under his body, forming a shocking pool of blood. You have crossed the line. Darren, the Navy, will not let you. The dim sunlight was obscured by a violent and twisted face, and Phils could only see shadows in front of his eyes, cold, dark, bloody, twisted shadows. Navy. Doflamingo looked down at the Mafia family leader on Lubeck Island in front of him, and smiled sarcastically. I'm really looking forward to it. After finishing his words, Doflamingo slowly raised his feet. The pointed-toed shoes stomped hard on Phil's head. Boom! A dull sound came out, and Phil's head exploded like a watermelon, with red and white mixed together like a ball of paste. Ask for everything and be grateful.